pop into your mind. It's probably stuff like this. The Jazz Age, flappers, you know, the great roaring 20s, everyone's getting rich and having fun, and it's awesome. One legend here in terms of the Jazz Age, our own Davenport, Iowa, Bix Beiderbecke. So he was, I love this from Louis Armstrong, every musician in the world knew and admired Bix. We all respected him as like he had been a god. That's pretty big time, isn't it? Very young when he died.
28 years old.
Yeah, very young when he died. But so much new technology coming on. This, you know, automobiles are pretty well established at this point. Radio is the hot new technology that's breaking the isolation of our Iowa farms and helping connect us to the wider world. Votes for women. I mean, this is really kind of a tumultuous time, a big time of change in America. So we've got the 19th Amendment that takes hold in early 1920. We finally have votes for women after all those years of women trying to get the national vote. We have Prohibition that also takes root in 1920. It takes hold, I should say, as the law of the land. Lasts till 1933. And as much as there were good intentions behind Prohibition, because Lord knows there were plenty of women that could tell horror stories of the husband drinking up the paycheck, and then we have no money to live on, we are getting spousal and child abuse from the drunk husband. All that Prohibition ultimately did was fuel a massive crime wave all over America. It fueled the mafia, it fueled crooks of all types, because people still wanted to buy alcohol, and now you had to do it on the black market. We also have immigration patterns changing. So we had just come off all these decades of just millions and millions of immigrants coming to our shores. Times are changing. Politicians signed this Immigration Act of 1924 at the federal level, where we put strict requirements and quotas on who could come in and how many people could come in. So quite a dramatic example there. 1921, over 222,000 Italians came into our country. By 1925, only 6,200. So there's a lot of change going on. One thing that totally gets overlooked in the national history of the Roaring 20s, they weren't roaring for everybody. This was a terrible time in the Iowa farm economy, because farmers had just made money hand over fist during that golden era of agriculture in the early 1900s up till about 1915. Then comes World War I. There's tremendous demand for our commodities to be exported during the war. But then when the war is over in November of 1918, the markets crash, and they crash hard, because suddenly our export markets evaporate. So land prices are tumbling off a cliff, commodity prices are tanking, farmers are losing money like crazy. I put up some numbers there to help you see just how dramatic these losses were. Think about that, the value of your crop being cut in half in 5 years. Farm income falling almost by 50%, a solid 41%, just in 2 years, 1919 to 21. And of course, just like now, your taxes, your input costs, your bills do not go down. So enter the KKK in the early 1920s. Now, this is not the first time America has seen the KKK. There's actually 3 waves of KKK history, and we will talk about all 3 of them. But let's talk about a little background to set the stage. Ku Klux Klan, what a weird name, right, with the KKK. It comes from the word kaiklos, a Greek word meaning circle, and then they also, every word they took, they put a K with it just to add their own spin, but Klan, we kind of know what a clan, a family, a group, but the KKK, it makes a nice alliteration, right? And since today's the last day at the Iowa State Fair, I threw up this poster just to show you that the Klan by the mid-20s was making major inroads into Iowa. Back here we've got a huge conclave and picnic at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. June 12th, 1926. It's an all-day long fair. Look at that, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. So a lot of this, Iowans embracing, Americans embracing of the KKK You had to understand that history. We just came through this tumultuous time where Americans feel like things are spinning out of control in a lot of ways, right along with the fun times of the 20s. We've got crime that's running rampant. We've got concern about these immigrants coming from Eastern European countries bringing Catholicism, more Catholicism to our shores. Why do we care about Catholics? Because the theory is they put more faith in the Pope than they do more respect and authority with the Pope than in our own system of American government. Loose morals, bootlegging, speakeasies, you name it, political corruption, which was also happening at the highest levels. People just felt like their world was spinning out of control in a lot of ways, and the KKK, believe it or not, was viewed as a way to kind of return to normalcy and get things under control. But this is not the first time anybody had ever heard of the KKK. This group actually takes root immediately after the Civil War. It was in Pulaski, Tennessee, a group of Confederate veterans that were very much concerned about the rise of black people having property rights and voting rights, and they wanted to protect white people's property rights and their way of life. So they come up with this secret society, which they called the Ku Klux Klan. It took off like wildfire in the South. Unfortunately, it started getting into a more paramilitary, aggressive, violent stance before too long, where we start doing physical harm to black people and folks we don't like. It was a really destructive force during that Reconstruction era, immediately following the post-Civil War era, or in the post-Civil War era. A very high up Lieutenant General here, Nathan Bedford Forrest, he was just one of the South's great heroes. He was actually the KKK's first Grand Wizard. But even as early as 1869, he realized, whoa, this thing is spinning way out of control beyond a fraternal organization that maybe is just promoting the South. I don't like at all the direction this is going. And he was condemning the KKK's excessive use of violence. But really, this was a case where the horse had gotten out of the barn. And so by 1870, we had KKK members doing all kinds of things that they shouldn't have been doing all over the South. Now, President Grant just did not sit by idly and say, well, gosh, that's too bad, but we can't do anything about it. He was very concerned about the growth of the KKK, especially in the South. He was trying to do the right thing for black people and getting this nation patched back together during Reconstruction. So in 1871, he issues this proclamation saying that the federal government will not support these terroristic acts of violence. This allowed him to actually go with martial law in a number of these regions. It's astounding to me that 9 counties in South Carolina alone had martial law at this time. The Attorney General also got involved with trying to bring some of these perpetrators to justice who were committing some of these terrorism acts. Unfortunately, some of this was deemed unconstitutional, and there was just mixed success. When these movements get going, it can be very difficult to squash them. Now, this really did kind of taper off. It took enough of a hit that the KKK did kind of fade away, but the attitudes and ideas that fueled the KKK never quite died. But we don't see much or hear much out of this group until after 1915. And it's usually attributed to this film called The Birth of a Nation. So D.W. Griffith was one of the superstars in the movie-making industry at this time. This was based on a book called The Klansman. That book had come out in 1905. And basically that was all about the South rising again, or restoring the honor of the South. And you can see even in the film, we don't actually have black people in The Birth of a Nation. We have white actors in blackface. And this movie got people, this was one of those you've got to see this movie kind of films, where it was a blockbuster by any standard at the time, and then it got people stirred up in a lot of different ways. So Thanksgiving Day 1915, this he was actually a former minister, Colonel William Simmons, and I believe he might have been a Methodist minister. I I would have to double check that. But he got together with some buddies. They went out to Stone Mountain near Atlanta, Georgia. They earned a cross, and guess what? This is now the birth of the second wave of the KKK. This is where our Iowa story starts intertwining in a big way with the national history of the KKK. So, like I mentioned, all these things that are going on causing a lot of turbulence for Iowans especially. We've got a farm economy that's really struggling, so people's economic future is uncertain. We've got prohibition, but that's fueled this crime wave. Now, for some people, like the bootleggers in Carroll County making Templeton Rye, there was money to be had. But still, this is also bringing high-profile Chicagoland gangsters right into our state who were buying these products. So the Klan sells itself as, hey, we'll get the job done that the government, the feds can't seem to do, which is keep you safe, get this country back on track. And sometimes we, Iowans, when they hear about the KKK at this time, they think, well, we didn't have a huge black population. What were they agitating about? Well, you're right. We didn't have a lot of black people in the state, but it was very much focused on anti-Catholic, anti-Semitic, and so they had plenty to work with there. To understand why the KKK took off like it did in the 20s, though, you've got to know D.C. Stevenson. This guy was a no-name, nobody, son of a sharecropper from the South, who was the ultimate opportunist, David Curtis Stevenson. He sees what's going on. Actually, he was kind of failed at a lot of things he tried to do in his life before he got involved in the KKK. He actually spent time in Iowa, believe it or not, as a military recruiter before he got involved in the KKK. But he sees this as an opportunity. He's living in Indiana at this point in his life. And Indiana is one of the hotbeds of the Midwest of the second wave of the KKK. He's an opportunist, remember? So he sees that this rising tide, this growing interest in this group called the KKK, ooh, I might want to get involved. I might want to get into the higher echelons of this because I can see there's the opportunity for money and for power. Both things that are very addictive to the human soul, unfortunately. So he got involved. He's helping governors like Ed Jackson, who was the Indiana governor at the time, helped him get elected. He learns he can start manipulating lawmakers by hanging out with some of these people that are involved in the KKK. And before you know it, in Indiana and beyond, suddenly we've got KKK members being elected to school boards. We've got them in high levels of business and elsewhere. And it all really in the Midwest goes back to Indiana. But they didn't stay in Indiana because when there's money and power to be had, why limit the pickings? So they sent recruiters out into other states to really drum up membership for this new organization. Iowa was one of those states. By about 1921, as best I can tell, the estimate of KKK members in Iowa was about 10,000. You fast forward just a few years, the estimates I have seen, I don't know how accurate they are, but 100,000. You think about that, we've got 99 counties, 100,000 members. That means roughly, give or take, we've got 10,000 KKK members per county across the state on average. Amazing. Amazing how quickly this took hold. It got so mainstream that there were KKK parades right down the streets in Washington, D.C., which is shocking, but true. So the marketing was essential to getting people all fired up and excited about joining this organization. Once again, because this was a fraternal organization with shades of secrecy, we don't have exact numbers about how many people exactly were involved at this time, but nationwide they think it was somewhere between 3 to 7 million people. And just think about this, that's cha-ching, just like I mentioned, money. If you're a recruiter getting commissions, you want to get everybody in town signed up. And I have had debates with people that know a little of this history, and I say what I have seen with my research, and it's actually hard to research this to a certain level, Larry, you know this, because yes, they were not secretive, but also to really understand the inner workings, it was kind of like the Masons, the Odd Fellows. they just didn't publish all that information in the local newspaper. So there's stuff that we just don't know for sure. But what we do know, at least this is Darcy's theory, I think a lot of people in towns like Perry got involved in this because they viewed it as not a lot different than the Oddfellows or the Masons or the American Legion. It's just another fraternal organization. And remember, this is the golden age of those fraternal organizations. Anybody who was a member of those. I don't know that people always knew just what they were getting into when they joined these groups. I've had people argue with me, oh, they knew exactly what they were getting into. I really don't believe that for most of your bread and butter, small town, Main Street business people, but I wasn't there. And nobody documented those things specifically, so I can't say that 100%. What I can tell you is if you joined the Klan in the 20s, you would have been exposed to these 12 claim points. So if you wonder what the Klan was promoting itself as in the 1920s, there you go. Some of these I can get on board with. Some are repulsive to me. As you glance through these, does anything jump out at you? They talk about schools, they talk about churches, the home, the flag, the Constitution.
I mean, number 12 obviously is...
Yes, our Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian civilization must be preserved. Yeah.
Because everything else, the Constitution.
I think we're all on board with that, right? The
Sure.
Constitution, yes, the flag.
Absolutely.
And that's the way evil tends to start most of the time. They mix a little or a lot of truth in with not so good things to make it more palatable. So I started, when I'm researching, I start seeing things making the newspaper with some regularity by about 1923. So this was actually in the Fort Dodge Messenger, but it deals with a case up in Sioux City where a Klan member was going after the local mayor up there and was trying to stir up trouble, wanted to have a big debate with this mayor. The mayor really wasn't feeling it. But you can see as early as 23, they were definitely starting to agitate in our communities. I tried to find information about this conclave up in Sioux City, so a gathering of KKK members. It looked like it was a pretty big affair. I have not had much success at this point finding numbers of attendees or anything like that. But you see the faces. We've got younger people. We've got women. This is a cross-section of our Iowa communities that would have been involved in things like this.
I thought they always wore masks so you couldn't see their face.
Not always. Isn't that fascinating?
That's fascinating.
Yeah, because sometimes they did have the mask, the hoods with just the eyes and maybe the mouth cut out. And I remember doing my research, Larry, down here in Perry when I did my Dallas County book. I asked someone about that, like, well, okay, they were really tricky then, having the hood and everything. And maybe you're the one that said, yeah, but everybody could see what car they pulled up in for the conclave, and you could see their boots, you know, their gowns didn't go clear, the robes didn't go clear to the ground, so it wasn't that hard to figure out who from your community might be wearing one of the robes.
Well, people told me that they're white robes. You wear that, and you get it dirty, and it's going to be hanging on your clothesline next week, you know, next week when you do your laundry. And people weren't ashamed of it.
No.
You know, there wasn't at that point in time when this was just hitting. One of the stories, have you do the thing about Pete Sumas?
Oh, yeah, talk about that.
Well, Pete Sumas had a shoe store downtown, right across the alley from the Josh Davis Plaza. Okay, he had a shoe store, but he also had a shoe repair store in there, and he had a shoe sign stand. And when they were doing one of the big marches that they had here, the people were marching down the street, and he's outside, and I think he was talking to his son or whatever, you know, about, you know, the people, because he says, I know lots of those people. I fixed those shoes, and I sewed it, you know, because at that time you bought a pair of shoes and you put them, went in and got new heels put on them and did things like that. And he could pick people out from the shoes, you know, as they walked down 2nd Street in Perry. But there were signs in the window, which I've seen the picture, but I've never been able to get a hold of it, of downtown businesses in Perry with no blacks allowed
Hmm.
in the windows.
Wow.
Really?
Wow. Amazing, isn't it?
Wow.
Just.
I think Marge Patterson, I think, was the one that showed me the picture.
So you have seen those pictures then? So you know the pictures exist?
I know the picture existed, and Marge was kind of had control over what her pictures and the stuff she had.
Oh, Marge Patterson who wrote the books.
She wrote the book, and then she did work for the Perry Chief, and she wasn't really good about sharing things, you know. So, but I did see it.
Well, that's good. So you know it existed.
Yes.
Well, and that brings up an important point, Larry, that I almost forgot to mention, because if you start asking around in your own communities about KKK history, which I did in my home county of Calhoun, I reached out to the county museum. I said, well, one of our history books here, it's the Rockville City Centennial book, there's a story in there about 1923 or 24, somewhere in there, about the KKK burning a cross at Twin Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been told that there's a picture of that event, and I've been told that that's at the museum. Oh yeah, we know what you're talking about, but we have no idea where that picture went. And you'll run into that a lot. Even if people will say, oh yeah, it exists, where is it? What happened to it? I don't know.
On 2nd Street, the Klan had an actual office.
Really?
I don't think it was a storefront. I think it was on the 2nd floor.
Second floor?
But they had a sign that lit up. It was a cross with red lights in it, and I saw the picture of that too. And again, I've been searching for this for, you know,
Decades.
50 years, you know, and I've never been able to come across it. And I still think that some of these I saw in Marge's personal archives, which she just didn't share with the public, you know.
What happened to those archives? Do you know?
A lot of this stuff went to the family, and what they did with it, we don't know.
We have no idea.
They've never told us, because we would like to get, you know,
Mm-hmm.
get our hands on that stuff, because we're going to be starting this new historic society, and we've gotten materials, you know. But there's some of this stuff, like I say, I know I saw that picture,
Yep.
but
It existed at one time. And this is a real challenge, especially with this topic, that people have, that history has a way of disappearing, vanishing, getting thrown away. People are so scared of it, they don't want to touch it. So just beware, that's part of the challenge of telling these stories. Yes?
Percy, did you ever see, I know I read this somewhere, where the Klan costume was representative of the ghosts of the Confederate soldiers? Did you ever read that?
I have read that too. I don't know if that's the true story, but it seems plausible. So yes, it was to represent the ghosts of their fallen comrades and the Confederate soldiers, and also playing into that concept of kind of the invisible empire, where you kind of see us, but you kind of don't. We're operating in the shadows a little bit or a lot, and that adds to the fear factor. Yeah.
So you've seen that, but it's not 100%
I
sure.
have seen that. I would like to verify that that is why they chose to go with the white robes and the hoods, but I haven't been able to verify that with 100% certainty.
a lot of this too, it was such a big organization that what was true or thought of true in North Carolina would not necessarily be true, you know, in Indiana, you know.
Right. And the other thing with the robes and the hoods, I can tell you for a fact that back at this time, because these fraternal groups were so dominant, if you've ever been to a museum where you see some of the old regalia that some of these other groups, the Masons, the Oddfellows, they all had their own regalia to go along with the different levels of leadership in those groups. I have pictures from a catalog from this era where you could order all that kind of stuff that you would need for your members and your local lodge. I don't know for sure if the Klan had a supply house like that you would order from, or did you just make your own bed sheets to make your robes and hoods? I don't know, but there again, with the money trail here, I wouldn't be surprised if there was an order house, a supplier where you would order this kind of stuff, because there's a lot of money to be made. If you've got millions of members across the country and you all need robes and hoods, just
So
think
they
how
didn't
much
make them out
money.
of sheets? You don't think they just made them out of sheets?
I don't know. I think some of them probably did do the
Yeah.
homemade version,
Right.
But I would like to find out if some of these regalia supply houses also carried KKK garb.
Well, here in Perry too, I know that it'd be across the street from Quick Star on the corner there. I think it's Vivi Nails, right there on the end.
Yeah.
That used to be, there were several houses and everything in that area. And I can remember my dad telling me that one of those houses, it was just like a 1 or 2 room, small place, but that was the cabin. And the cabin was where the Klan women and everybody met, and it was like a social thing, like their social hall.
Was it west of Quick Star then?
It would have been east of Quick Star, across the highway.
Oh, okay. East.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
First Street.
Yeah.
First Street, right?
Right on First Street, yeah. But he said that was a meeting place and everything, but they did social things. And I've seen some pictures of that, and it'll say Ku Klux Klan meeting at the cabin, and that's where it was.
Oh, sure. Interesting. Well, one little treasure that we do have in Iowa history, this is extremely rare, but from the Waterloo area, one of the record books from the KKK got saved. So we do know a few things about that particular clavern, as they called their unit. That was your local unit, was a clavern. So in 1925 to 28 is when this record book had survived from. So almost 200 members, 198. We've got everybody in there from farmers to machinists to doctors to business managers. It cut across all types of employment. They paid their dues quarterly, so once again, we've always got money changing hands. About $1.50 per quarter was what your dues were. That's about $27 and $24. And we had booklets to help you learn all the skills of clannishness once you joined the Klan. That particular book, you can see that at the museum in Greenfield, Iowa, which we will talk about in a minute. But you can see the income and the outflows from that Waterloo record book during that 24 to 26 time period. So when we have income, at least the local clavern is making some money on the robe payments. So that tells me not everybody was making homemade garb, because we have money flowing in to pay for a robe. We also are selling tickets to Klan-sponsored events, and then they had quite a few expenses too. We're advertising, so once again, we're not necessarily hiding, or else we're hiding in plain sight. We have taxes. I can't tell you what imperial and realm taxes are for sure. A lot of times at their big events, they would have bands and parades, so we had to pay for local bands to come in and provide entertainment. And because this is the 20s and the dawn of the airplane age, I found it fascinating. They paid for a cross for airplanes. So this, I suppose, was either mounted on the plane or the plane was towing a cross across the sky. Everything they did publicly was definitely for spectacle. So they were masters of managing the media and getting their story out there. They would only tell you parts of the story, but they definitely knew how to attract media attention and get people to want to come to their events. And like Larry indicated, yes, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say before you got into the subject, imperial and realm taxes makes me think, was there a central federal, like not government funded necessarily,
But like a national organization.
Yes. Mississippi was paying to Iowa, paying to Michigan.
Yep, I think you're right. That's probably what that was. And as far as I know, that the head of the national was out in Indiana, where our friend D.C. Stevenson was. So you can see why, if you game the system right, a guy like him at the head of the pyramid could be raking in a lot of money.
Do you know the town in Indiana? Or the area? Was it like close to Chicago, the north?
I do. You're good at looking things up, Carolyn. Would you look up D.C. Stevenson for me? Because I'm just blanking on the town in Indiana. But it was, yeah, we'll find that for you.
Is it spelled S-T-E-P-H?
Yes, it's with a P-H. S-T-E-P-H-E-N. S-E-N-S-O-N. Yep.
You know, we've been to Indiana in various, Jonesboro? Sure? Oh, born, well, died in Jonesboro. Anyway, we've been in Indiana, and I know you get down south, and it's very southern.
Oh,
We
yeah.
think of Indiana
We
being
think of it as Midwest, right?
Oh,
But you
yeah.
get into parts of Indiana, Illinois,
Oh, it's
you
south.
cross the Mason-Dixon at that
Oh,
point.
yeah. So what is it you want to know about Darcy?
The
Maybe it's
city
not
where he was
Indiana,
based when he was
KKK.
making all the big bucks with the KKK.
Okay.
I want to say Muncie, but I don't think that's right. I do know his house is still standing, the big house where he had all the parties and everything.
My husband's from Chicago, and you hear so much about finding bodies from the mafia, you know,
Oh,
to
yeah.
northern Indiana.
Oh, yeah,
Still, even, you know, different things.
exactly.
And I don't know if the mafia would blend with the KKK.
Probably not, since
Yeah.
they were on more of this, we're crime
That's right,
fighters.
they're right further south.
But yet they use some of the same tactics if you
Yeah,
get down to brass
that's true.
tacks,
Yeah.
so. And sometimes people are shocked to find out that women were involved in the KKK, but there were auxiliary units of women in the KKK, and that was true in Perry,
In
wasn't
Perry,
it,
yes.
Larry?
There
Yes.
was?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
women's? Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yep, exactly. And the KKK even had its own newspaper at times, and Carolyn, you shared this with me, the Washington Township School Connection, because of Mike Flynn's book, who he talked about this. So as early as 1923, we've got Klan activity starting to rear its head out there south of town here at the historic Washington Township School. And then before you know it, in a few years, we've got all kinds of members all over Perry. So there was one of their ads in a local paper. Once again, they're not being secretive. So get out there to the fairgrounds on September 24th, 1923. And if I understand where the fairgrounds were, Larry, they were out where Hy-Vee and Ace Hardware are. Is that
Right.
correct?
Right?
Yep, yep.
Fairgrounds?
Yeah.
There used to be a skating rink there too, right?
Yeah, that would be, yeah, in that area, it just depending on what you're talking about, the skating rink would be further back into town. you know,
Okay.
But, because it took a pretty good sized chunk of land.
Yeah, it would have. And look at that, 6,000 people. So I looked up the population of Perry in between that 1920, 1930 time frame. It was smaller then than it is now, surprisingly, at least according to the data center numbers I saw. But somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,800 people, give or take, was the population of Perry back then. So we essentially doubled the population of the town just with this one event. But like you indicated, Larry, these weren't necessarily all local people. Some were.
Oh,
but-
no, we had the interurban railroad at that time.
That's right.
And the interurban put on extra trains to bring up people from Des Moines
Oh,
to this, you know.
interesting.
And I talked to old George Stoner, he used to be one of my go-to people to pick their brain, and he said, yeah, he said that there were so many cars in town and everything, that he said, and so the fairgrounds is located where Hy-Vee is today, but people were parking like where the post office is today,
Ooh,
and walking because they couldn't get it, you know, there was no parking
wow.
at the fairgrounds, you know.
Wow.
So,
And what I've been told is some of this, they were KKK members, some were just hangers-on, like, well, what's the big deal down at the fairground? Let's go
Oh, yeah.
see what this is all about. Did you find it?
Well, building on momentum, Stevenson set up a base in Indianapolis where he helped create the weekly newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis, which would be central, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Central. That's the first town I've,
Okay. Good.
I found Martinsville, which is in between Bloomington and Indianapolis, which again is central.
Okay.
Well, this was just a story that was there, that a black woman was going to college in
Okay.
Indiana, and her parents told her, don't drive through Martinsville,
Really?
as she went to school.
Wow. Isn't that something? We just don't think of that being an issue in the north, do we? But it was.
I would assume it had been more farther south where it gets closer to Kentucky.
Right. That's what's so amazing about this history. You think you know history, and then you dig into this, and it turns a lot of things you thought you knew on its head, doesn't it? And look at that. One of the speakers at this big event, a pastor. Pastor of the Normal Park Methodist Episcopal Church of Chicago. Wow.
Methodist Episcopal?
Yeah.
They were kind of fundamental back then, weren't they? Was Methodist Episcopal?
You would think they wouldn't have been real liberal,
Well, yeah.
but more on the conservative
Back in
side.
the 20s, our grandmother thought the Methodists were.
Oh, were they kind of too wild, too liberal, or what?
We just, Methodists don't listen to Catholics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I remember that. Oh, yeah. But then when her church, the United Brethren, joined with the Methodists, was like, yuck, but they went with them, you know?
Right, because we had no choice, because we had declining congregation populations, right? So then the big one in Perry came in early June of 24. Look at that. If you thought 6,000 was
I
impressive.
think this was the one I was talking about when the people had to park
Had to park way
down,
by
you
the
know,
post office.
blocks and blocks away. Yeah.
So lest anyone think this was all secret, that's the front page of the Perry newspaper, folks. Amazing, isn't it?
Charles Lindbergh, a member of the KKK?
I don't know.
Because he was not who I always thought he was, some, like, you know.
But he was kind of aligned more with communist style politics, and I don't know, I will have to look that up, but
I
he
can
very
see
well could have been.
What I've read about him, he would fit.
He would fit, wouldn't he? Yeah, I agree.
So we're back to saying the KKK in Perry was against Catholics. Because they weren't against Jews and they weren't against blacks so much, because we didn't have blacks.
Oh yeah, we did. We had one of the bigger.
Not that many, you said just associated with the railroad. So
Well, but we had one of the biggest populations in Iowa because almost all the blacks,
Perry,
yeah, in Perry,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And they were permanent residents because they worked at this roundhouse.
Yeah.
And then every porter in the United States that rode on a passenger train was a black man.
Sure. Okay.
And we had passenger trains. This was, if you wanted to get on the Milwaukee Railroad, you had to drive up from Des Moines to get on it because this was the main line through Perry.
Okay.
So no, we had a huge population at one time.
Proportion-wise, you would have had a lot of black people. I don't know what it would have been as a proportion of Perry's entire population, but compared to most small Iowa towns, it was quite a bit.
Well, I remember my mother telling me she was from Audubon, and she couldn't find work after she graduated, and her uncle was the police chief here in Perry, and they had talked to him, and he said, well, she can come up to Perry and stay with me until she gets, a job, and he said, I'll help her. And so she came to Perry, and she said her big concern coming to Perry was that she knew there were black people, and she said she had only seen one or two black people in her life.
Right. And where was she from?
Audubon. She said they just didn't,
I never saw black people, it was kids in Perry.
There was,
They left because of the railroad.
Yeah, they left
When did
a lot of
they
them.
expand the roundhouse?
Well, they tore down the old roundhouse because trains got bigger and they couldn't use it, and then they built the one out behind
So it was
Tyson.
in the 30s, 40s?
Probably the 30s or probably in there. I'd have to look on that.
but there were still black people.
Oh, we had some of them
I
stayed,
didn't see
you know.
I didn't see it.
There was the guy who was the big athlete. What was his name? The guy who died recently. He was a very good athlete. He'd be about 76, 78.
Yeah.
You know who he is.
Yes.
Yeah.
You'll think of it.
What James?
But yeah, I'm so glad you're here because you can fill in some of these gaps and it's really good. I'm going to stop right now. Is this offensive to anybody? Am I dredging up stuff that's just got everyone freaked out?
History's history.
It's history. You don't have to love this stuff. You don't have to hate it either.
But you
just
do
have
need to try and understand it. You
try
need to
and
be aware of
understand,
it and try and understand why it happened because nothing happens in a vacuum.
Well, that's what I told Carolyn before we started, the Holocaust. Kids now that are protesting all over the colleges, they don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what
They
they're
don't
talking
know
about.
history. They don't even believe there was such a thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They say, why are you here? Well, somebody paid me $50 to show up today.
Exactly. They don't know what the river to the sea, what they're talking about there. Some folks are Holocaust deniers. That's exactly why Eisenhower wanted the film footage taken of the concentration camps. They don't teach it.
My father said that he went in at D-Day +5 into Normandy, and he was in anti-aircraft battery. So he was behind the front lines with this anti-aircraft. And as they kept moving closer and closer into Germany, they had nothing to do, because the Luftwaffe, for all intents and purposes, was gone. And he said one day that they lined everybody up, had called them up for formation, lined them all up, and they did what they call stack arms, where they make a little pyramid out of their weapons, and told them to get onto these trucks. And they're just thinking, oh boy, we're going for R&R. We're going to go get showers and play baseball and maybe see a movie. And everybody had their own idea what, because they weren't taking their weapons. They weren't going anyplace dangerous. So they hauled him, and I can't remember the name of the camp, and it wasn't like Dachau or,
Was one of the big.
it was a work camp.
Okay,
So it wasn't a place where they were executing,
okay.
but that's where they went. And he said, on the way there, he said it was just people are joking and laughing, and they're singing and telling stories and everything. And he said they got off, and then they read a declaration from Eisenhower that he wanted to have as many of his troops see, if possible, to see what was actually happening there, because he said there will come a time in history where people will deny that this ever happened.
Isn't that the truth? And that was so wise of him, because when I was growing up and I would learn this history, I thought, oh, that's pretty extreme. How could you ever deny this history?
Well,
And here we are.
again, my father he said that they marched them in, and it was a work camp, but they just worked these people to death. And he said there were people there that they had no meat on their bones. It was just skin and bones, and everything. And he said they came out, and everybody was he said you couldn't put your head around that a human being can do that to another human being. And but I know growing up, a lot of times my dad would always watch war stories and things like that. And if they got into anything to do with the concentration camps or something, he'd get up and go to the other room or change the channel or whatever, because it just brought up too many bad memories.
Wow.
Everybody needs to see the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. That's something everybody.
Well, he said that they read a thing from Eisenhower, and that was the reason they were there, was to bear witness to this. And,
To bear witness.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And like Larry and I were talking, bearing witness does not mean that we celebrate this stuff. It does not mean that we encourage it to happen again. But it does mean we've got to know why that it happened and why it happened and what it means for us today. So some of these folks that were really into the KKK around here, like Walter Schell, he was a farmer. He specifically said, I want a full-on KKK funeral when I die. And so that's what he got. So the KKK took charge of this funeral. One of the biggest funerals in Perry history, I would guess, 1,500
Up until that time, they say that it was the largest funeral in Perry.
Wow.
So he's there relatives around here anymore?
No.
And, the cross, you can I wish these pictures were better, and I wish they were in color, but in one of them in the back, you can kind of see that top picture. The newspaper told us it was a huge cross made of deep crimson roses. And not only did this make the local paper, but it made the Des Moines Register too. And they had about 200 robed Klansmen and women that were in this procession and leading this service at the graveside. And then those Klan members actually formed a cross with the grave in the center.
Where's this cemetery? Where's this?
Perry.
But where? Perry.
I haven't been out there for a number of years, but it's on that main road that goes north and south, off to the right side.
Oh, it's to the right?
I think it's on the right side, yeah. Like I said, I haven't been there for a number of years. And you asked if there were any family members, and I looked into that, because for a long time I didn't use the person's name.
Right, because you were afraid it was their great uncle.
Right, and so then when I did some research, and there wasn't anybody, but then somebody else put it, one of the funeral home directors pointed out, he said, well, we don't know if he had daughters that married or, he said, so there still may be some in the community, but he said you'd have to really get into some genealogy to track it down.
And I would argue now, with so many of our newspapers digitized, I mean, anybody, if you type in KKK Iowa and you go to newspapers.com, you will find this stuff. So I guess people can hide from their history, but it's out there, folks. Let's just deal with it. But I respect it when families get very concerned about this stuff, because I probably would have pretty mixed emotions too about if this were in my family. But like you said, Larry, we can't change the past. Let's deal with it and move on. So were they secretive about their stuff? No, there were pictures in the Des Moines Register. This was on the front page, these little clippings, the front page of the Daily Chief back in January after Mr. Schell had died, and it's sending a notice to all the Klans people. Hey, here's where we muster. Here's what we're going to do for the service.
Please bring robes.
Please bring robes.
Yeah, right? Bring your robe. Like I say, right on the front page.
Women of the Ku Klux Klan will meet, so, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Just unbelievable. And in Perry, you know, the Klan didn't go away after he died. He was just one of many Klansmen. The Klan continued on in 1926. There we have a little snippet about the school board election. I think it's interesting they don't mention who the Klan members were that got defeated, so I can't tell you that, but they were defeated. So I want to point out, too, that just because these groups were active in these communities does not mean that they had a lock on these communities. There were newspaper editors that spoke out against this. There were voters that pushed back. So I don't want anybody under the misconception that if the Klan came to town, they just ran the place. No, they don't. Now, it's interesting what you said, Larry, about that house over by Quick Star, because I don't know where I found this. I need to go back and check my sources, but I do know this is from 1927, where they were talking about building, I would call it a clavern, where you're out of a conclave, or whatever they called their meeting houses. The term's escaping me right now, but you can see they had a pretty good chunk of change there.
I think it basically the way it was described to me was it was like a big room and like maybe a kitchen and restrooms, and that was
pretty basic.
Yeah, it was just a basic building.
And
yeah.
there it is, Dr. Mabel Andrews. Dr. Mabel. She's the one that had the sale, or her robe could not be at the Catholic Church. They had to take it out. That's her, Dr. Mabel.
What was she a chiropractor?
She was a doctor.
She was a full-on medical.
Very, very only women doctors in Perry.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
But she was a Klan member.
She was a Klan member.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and Andrews, so it doesn't make sense.
that doesn't make sense,
Oh,
does it?
Yeah, that's
really-
that's his right hand or whatever.
That's fascinating then, that's a Catholic family.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Wow.
Catholic.
I don't know if it was one of those, it was good for business, so there's so many mysteries and there's so many things like that you would love to ask, and there's nobody to ask.
This is a sideline, but
Yeah.
in our shop we have an organ which Paul got online for free. And when we went to pick it up, it's a beautiful old organ. And Gabby Me said, what's the deal with this? Well, my aunt used to live in Perry, and she took care of a lady that was a lady doctor in Perry, and she, rather than get paid one time, she gave her the organ because she wanted it for music lessons.
Really?
And I'm like going, okay.
Is that
how many
Mabel
lady doctors were
Andrews?
there in Perry? So I talked to Bill, my old boss, but can't think of his last name now. Bill,
Clark?
Bill Clark, yeah. And other people, Pete, and they said, I had to be Dr. Mabel, had to be,
Mm-hmm.
I thought there were a couple of them.
A couple lady doctors?
Yeah.
Well, we're saying this because we're giving it to a Hamlin member,
Yeah.
so a family member.
There you
Because
go.
Hamlin's and the Andrews are connected. So.
There you go. And lest anybody get the idea that this was just a Perry thing, it was not. We'll take a little tour around the state, Indianola, Warren County, a Klan pageant. And this is another one of those things that makes me think, what the heck? Everybody welcome, regardless of creed, color, or nationality. What? After all I've told you about what the Klan was about, but there it is, right above that arrow down there. Wow.
That's funny.
Newton had a conclave in 1924 at the park, big parade, 50 robed horsemen, Klansmen, Klanswomen, come hear the truth. Cherokee had a big parade, gathered down by the river. This is, I believe, 1923. They have a museum up there called the Sanford Museum, and the director was telling me a summer or two ago that people, just kind of like Hometown Perry, people will bring stuff in and show stuff. Someone came in and said, look at this. We moved into this house in Cherokee. We found is this a KKK robe? Because it was up in the attic, a robe and a hood. And this person that brought it in was just really uneasy and freaking out, and the director of the museum said, well, yes, that's what it appears to be. We do know there was Klan activity back in the 20s, and this person didn't want to donate it. They didn't want to continue the conversation. It was just like this hot potato, like, what do I do with this?
And they took it home and they didn't leave it at the
They
museum.
did not.
You notice that one has the holes cut out.
Yes. Yep. So it's very interesting to look at these pictures. Some of them are full-on hoods with just the holes, some of them are showing their face. Greenfield, for whatever reason, was a hotbed, an absolute hotbed of KKK activity in Iowa. There's your Grand Dragon, Ralph Hoyt. He was a local businessman. He obviously outlived the actual second wave of the Klan, but when he was a younger guy, when the second wave was really hitting its peak in the 20s, he was all over it there in Adair County. I mean, we talk about the black population in some of these Iowa communities. Well, in Greenfield at the time, as far as I can tell from the historians in Adair County, Greenfield only had one black family, and there's their son on the high school football team back then. So it was a Wise family. Andy, the father, had a hamburger stand in downtown Greenfield. The mother ran a tea room. Billy, who they called the Rocket, because he was such a good athlete, he's the only black kid on the whole high school football team there. I never got the sense from what their historians were telling me that the family really had, I don't know for sure, but I didn't get the sense that the KKK was actually targeting the blacks that much, because there was just this one family, and they were pretty well liked by all accounts, at least what I could tell. And he's a great athlete. I'm sure he helped the football team win. I don't know why the family eventually moved to Creston, but as you will see in some slides later, it's not like the KKK wasn't active in Creston. So what I can tell you is that in Adair County, there is a town called Fontenelle. It's a small town, but in those days it wasn't that uncommon to have Jewish families in town, at least one Jewish family. Usually they were clothing merchants, they ran clothing stores. So I am guessing that the Klan activity in this part of the world might have been more directed towards the Jewish family in Fontenelle, because notice they had their big rally in Fontenelle. July 30th, 1925 was at least one of the events that they had. And we do know that it was the Friedman family, Menzer and Friedman. They had a clothing store. This is the Jewish family. The Friedmans had this clothing store on the square in Fontenelle for years. They didn't move to Des Moines until the late 40s, so that tells me they most likely were not run out of town by the KKK back in the day. But I'm sure if the KKK had turned their ire against this family back then, maybe life wasn't so pleasant, but it also didn't drive them out of Fontenelle immediately. But this was one of the places where they took things to a whole new level with a clavern. So where the Adair County Hospital stands today in Greenfield, that's where this clavern was. It was dedicated right around this time of year in August of 1926. That's my poor attempt to photograph a very large panoramic picture that's in the museum in Greenfield. And I'm only trying to show you, I mean, the building itself is not impressive. What is impressive is the hundreds and hundreds of people that came to this dedication. It spans a photograph that's about yay big in real life. And that is just amazing to me. So, about 10,000 people showed up for this big dedication around August 24th, 1926. The building cost $50 grand, which is not that far off from the equivalent of $1 million building today. It was huge. That building was eventually torn down in 1948. And as I mentioned, the hospital in Greenfield now stands on that spot. They had their own branded folding chairs, so you can see one of those at the museum if you'd like to. They've got about 4 of those, I believe, at the museum, so all labeled with KKK, just so you know.
Where's the museum in Greenfield?
It is on the west edge of town, and I was there just about 2 weeks before the tornado hit this year. I was in town to give my culinary history of Iowa program, and I was so sad. I mean, that terrible, terrible tornado. I was so sad for the people of Greenfield, and then my thoughts turned to, oh my gosh, what happened to the museum? Did the tornado didn't touch it.
So, west side of town, right?
West side of town. Yeah. So they have amazing things. Like I say, a lot of museums will not even display this stuff because stuff mysteriously disappears through the years. They will show you this stuff. It's in display cases. There's one of the certificates from Roy Otis, who was a member of the local KKK back in the day. And lest you think this is just for women and men, No, we had kids involved too. That's Adair County, Iowa. I'm sad to say, but they were dressed up in their gear for a Klan event.
Wow.
1926. That's the stuff that makes you say, wow, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
in
still
one of their
fascinating
local
with the
history.
pointed head.
Yeah.
What is the deal with the pointed head? Ghosts have pointed head? I don't understand that.
I don't know. And then that little one in the middle, she looks more like a nurse, like a Red Cross
exactly, she
nurse.
does.
So, yeah, and of course the kids, they don't have the hoods with the eyes cut out, so we can obviously see
But
their
what is the
faces.
point? To me, witches have pointed, I mean, is there something with the point? You know what
I
mean?
don't know. That's a really, I guess these things don't happen by accident, right?
They
And the
don't.
Klan was
They
so
don't.
much about symbolism. I have a
They
feeling
don't.
there is
There's
a
connection,
story
I swear.
behind it.
I swear.
I just need to do some more digging.
If you find out, let me know.
I will. So I told you Creston, if the Wise family was trying to get away from persecution, I don't know if they were or not, but obviously the Creston, Iowa had its share of KKK activity too. So it cost you $0.25 to get in 1925. Not really expensive, even with the equivalent today of $4.50 to get in. They did invite children. I don't know what the Klan wedding was all about, but I'm guessing it was a Klansman and a Klanswoman that were going to get married at this thing. They had cash prizes. Amazing. Largest fiery cross ever seen in Iowa. Oh my gosh.
Well, Darcy, to me, it would have been more logical for this to have been in the 30s when everybody was poor.
I
You know
know.
what I mean? Everybody
I
was
totally
poor.
get what you mean.
It makes more sense.
It makes more sense, and yet that's not at all how it
That's
was.
not how it was. It just
Uh-uh.
isn't.
It's just strange. It's kids under 12. Bring your kids, Kids under 12 get in free. Corydon, Southern Iowa, they had a conclave, 1925. You can see that these things went a long time too, 3 p.m. to 8:30. We're having speakers, band concerts, parades. I don't know what the beautiful demonstration of the Goddess of Liberty was, but I'm sure that was some sort of production. We had a mysterious feature that will be given at 10:30 p.m. I'm guessing maybe that was a cross burning. No American should miss this 2 hours of entertainment. That's kind of an interesting term to call all this entertainment. But once again, admission's $0.25, plenty of parking space. Children under 12 years free. Cars will be patrolled. I'm not quite sure what that means. I have my own theories, but that's an intriguing statement, is it not? Cars will be patrolled?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Betrayal who's coming in?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I just don't
Interesting.
know for sure.
Interesting.
And Perry wasn't the only place that had a KKK funeral. There were lots of places around the state at this time. Sheraton, there's one where we're not shy. We're out in the middle of the street by the church in our full regalia. And it looks like Carolyn there, I'm guessing it's a little unclear, but I think those are the cutout eyes rather than the full-on
I
faces.
would say that too.
Yeah.
Maybe that's their form of power to
It
intimidate.
is.
to
It's
intimidate
intimidation.
the Black families or whatever.
Absolutely,
They
because
didn't have crosses and hang blacks, did they, like
Right.
they did in the South?
no, we didn't have lynchings. Not in Iowa. I can't find evidence of lynchings and the really, really horrible
So
things.
what else did they do? I mean, as far as intimidation.
Exactly. It's intimidating because you look at those. It's still it's unsettling to look at these pictures, isn't it? It's disturbing. It does not make me feel comfortable. Intimidation is a huge weapon.
I never thought about that. There were never like lynchings in Iowa. Never thought about that.
I don't want to say there never were because
It's
just
just-
about the time you say never, there.
Right.
But it would be extremely rare.
Extremely rare.
Extremely rare.
Interesting. Yeah, well, that's good to say anyway.
It is. It is. So there's hope. Iowa was not totally lost. And another thing I can tell you from some of the history on this, sometimes what these robed KKK members would do on a Sunday morning, they would silently just open the church door. They would all file up to the front. They would make a nice big fat financial donation in the plate. They would turn around and proceed at the church and let the church service go on undisturbed. But that sends an interesting message, doesn't
You
it?
wonder if some people would not keep it, right? They say, you take your dirty money, I don't want it. But
Yeah.
it probably didn't do that.
I don't think so. I've never seen any. And a lot of times the pastors are the people who
Yeah.
are featured speakers at these events. It's just mind-boggling. Sheldon, Iowa. This is one of the other places where the Klan was real huge. Bless them up at the museum in Sheldon. They are not afraid to show some of the KKK items from back in the day. And I see that it was either, I think it was this spring, they were going to have a Christian rock concert or a Christian music concert in Sheldon, and their goal was to have more people than the thousands and thousands that came to this conclave in 1924.
Isn't Sheldon Dutch country?
Mhm.
I mean, Dutch.
That's one more reason you think this happened up there close to Sioux County and that area where we've got these conservative, very faithful
Yes.
Dutch heritage
Dutch
people.
heritage.
It was everywhere. It was everywhere.
It's very interesting.
And then comes what I would call the beginning of the end for the second wave. So there's our buddy, that evil D.C. Stevenson, the head honcho out in Indiana. He was just a lech. He was a womanizer. He was brutal to women. Any criminal activity, it's safe to say he was probably involved in it. And a nice young lady in that community where he lived came to see, she got connected with him. She's 28 years old, still living at home with mom and dad. She had a job. She was a nice young woman by all accounts. She gets mixed up with him. He invites her to go on a train trip, or says, "You are going on a train trip to Chicago with me." He rapes her. He bites her so badly that she's got terrible bite wounds all over her body. They get infected. She dies of the infected wounds. So now he is a murderer, essentially. And so later that same year of 1925, fortunately he does get convicted and sent to life in prison. But he's not overly worried, because remember, he helped the governor of Indiana get into political power, so he thought, well, I'll just bide my time and Ed will get me out. Well, Ed, for whatever reason, did not bail him out. This guy is madder, D.C. Stevenson's madder than a wet hen at this point, so he starts singing, and he starts naming names of who all in the Klan is involved in all these unsavory activities at the highest levels. And because we've got political ties, we're naming some heavy hitters here. And so this is what the Indiana Klan just goes down the tubes almost immediately after this happens. It starts fading away elsewhere very quickly after this point. As you can see from some of those earlier clippings, yes, it was still active here into 26, 27, but really the end had started in late 25 nationally. It didn't take long then, because then comes the big crash of October of 29, the stock market crashes, then comes the Great Depression. The KKK actually disbands nationally for a time in 1940.